Okay, now let's see if this is actually working.
Okay,
Bonus.
now let's see if this is actually working.
Okay, that's all I needed. Okay, so now we just wait for things to happen. Because for me, it's real simple. Figured I'd go a slightly different road and take a look at something else that is actually connected. When I talk about all things being connected, I mean literally everything is. So, to start with, my name is R. Keith Andrews. I am a spiritual guide, and I return to this world for one, and I try that again. I am a spiritual guide and paranormal adept. Okay. The reality of it is this. I return to this world for one primary purpose, and that is to remind everybody in existence that working together, we can make this a better world for virtually everybody. Now, I'm looking at this a little differently, as I said last week, and a couple of times this week for that matter. I'm going to be looking at the rise and fall. Good morning, Joe. How are we doing? I'm going to be looking at the rise and fall of the Draconian Empire. Now, where this pertains to mankind is we're doing exactly the same thing and we have the same pattern that we're following. So how about if we learn from them? Okay. Now this can apply, these lessons can apply to society, to a business if you're running it, to your own household, your own financial evolution. Okay. All of these things are connected. Now, if we look back right at the root of society, okay, Draconians, like every race, have had the same outcome, have started in the same place. They did not start as superpowers in the intergalactic profile. Okay, they just didn't start that way. They started off crawling out of the mud, learning how to work with each other. If you think that mankind is aggressive, to be honest there, Joe, I'm not married either. Do I have a significant other at this point? Yeah. But no, my marriage didn't quite work out the way I was hoping for. Hopefully the next one will. But no, if you think like people talk about humans being aggressive, humans don't leave body parts around at the end of a war. They leave complete bodies. Draconians being carnivorous, while bearing in mind they are still carnivorous, cannibalistic, and carrion eaters. Okay, you can picture what a mankind used to have when we go back to the Middle Ages. Mankind would have these great big wars, and after the fights, you hear the legends about the Norsemen having these great big knockdown parties afterwards. Okay, where they gorge themselves on finely cooked foods and what have you. Draconians, after a battle, would have lunch right there. Friends, relatives, enemies, it didn't matter. Okay, when we're talking about a violent race, mankind doesn't even hold a candle to half the reptilian races out there, except one. Okay, the Zotar, yeah, you don't have to worry about them. You do. They're dangerous. But when we take a look at the Draconian Empire, it started off in the muck. Okay, it started off as an animal that had not evolved. Okay, and in that respect, they had to learn how to interact with each other. They had to learn how to socialize. They had to learn how to cooperate, and they had to learn that the fact that you didn't have, that your skills were a slightly different tinge, did not make you less of a draconian. Okay, they had to figure out that skin color or skin density or the length of your teeth or the length of your claws did not make you a better draconian. All it made you was different. Okay. And they absolutely went through this issue where you had the one side that were very volatile, very aggressive. The other side were the thinkers. Okay, the passive people. And I mean, when you take a look at that side of it, you're dealing with a major shift in the way that they were. So they did come from that ground. Okay, much like mankind started off before they even lived in caves. Okay, they started off running for their lives on the ground. Now, yes, we've got the idea of creationism, where all of a sudden mankind was fully developed and still, well, in all fairness, if mankind was fully developed at the peak of its intelligence, well, it's no wonder we're having trouble today, because that seems to have dropped rather drastically. But when we look at the Draconian Empire, it really boils down to this. They started off the same way that mankind has, the same way that every other race that I've come in contact with has. Okay. And I mean, ultimately, you're looking at a race that has gained galactic superiority in a lot of ways. But they had to figure out that fighting amongst themselves was not working. Okay, much like mankind has to figure it out. Okay, the one thing they never did was they never evolved to the point of let's throw food away. Okay, let's just say, no, you can't give food to the poor. Okay, and rest assured, bearing in mind these people they eat their deceased, provided, see, they've got two ways of dealing with people that pass away. Okay. If their father is sitting at the dinner table, and many of the Draconians of the reptilian races, especially the three that are descended from the Draconians, when you look at the Srazazians, the Tormenon, and the Kamalians, okay, they all have the same attitude towards life and death, as it were. Okay, if you're sitting at the dinner table and your father dies of old age, not of disease, okay, if they die of old age, or if they die because of a wound, okay, and they pass away, no problem. Throw them on the dinner table right there. It's like, thanks, Dad, you were great. Now let's have dinner. You're it. Okay, that is one way. When the Draconians come back from a fight, and this has been going on for time immemorial. Okay, when they come back from a conflict, if they are wounded, they are healed. They're put back together. But if their wound makes them dysfunctional, okay, for instance, they lose a limb, they lose a leg, an arm you can work around. There are jobs they can do. Okay, but if you get crippled to the point, for instance, if you're quadriplegic and you can't move, you're just simply going to be cared for, they'll terminate you. They won't even blink. They'll just up and terminate you. Okay. If you die of anything other than toxin or disease, if you die of toxin or disease, they haul your body down to the fusion reactor, drop it in, and carry on. Okay, there is no big ceremony around it. There's no great big to-do about it. They do have their belief. But once you're dead, their opinion is simple. If you've been leading a bad life, you're not going to, if you continually have led a bad life, okay, you're not getting into what they look at as what you would call heaven. You're not going there. Okay, there is no last minute redemption. It's just not going to happen. Okay, you can beg for forgiveness. You can beg to be let in. Do what you will. Once you die, that's where things get a little screwy for them, and we'll get into that at a different point. Right now, I'm just looking at the Empire itself. Okay, they started off very simply because their whole body is designed for carnivorous consumption. Okay, whether it happens to be meat, relative, or carrion, it doesn't matter. They don't differentiate. Dead meat is dead meat. It's that simple. That's what their body is designed for. That is what they've come to. Now, you'll never find a draconian that is vegetarian, primarily because they will die. Okay, it's that simple. Okay, because their body is not designed for it. Okay, it's very much the same idea that humans are not designed for a vegetarian diet. And this idea that is being propagated right now, okay, people, I'm not debating whether or not the scientists have come up, or the medical professionals have come up with this concept that here's the same protein from this plant that you get if you're eating red meat. I won't argue with what they've said. I will tell you they're not looking at the subquantum biomagnetic flux. They're not looking at the smaller part of it. Okay. And the reason I know this is because they haven't started looking at the smaller part of it yet. That's just the reality behind it. So we take a look at where that came out well, at where the draconian race is, and go, okay, what are we up against? How are we dealing with this? Because the reality behind it, as far as the overall goes, is that as a society, the draconians figured out, or if you call them the drakes, whichever, draconians are on average 13 to 15 feet tall. Okay, part of that is because of the amount of oxygen in their atmosphere. Okay, the amount of breathable air. Okay, and the richness of it. Same thing happened here on Earth. Okay, plants grew bigger, the people grew bigger, the whole 9 yards. But what they had to figure out was that it took all kinds of people. Okay, they did find that darker skinned draconians were better suited to hunting at night. Okay, primarily because of the fact they were harder to see. Didn't do a thing for their pheromonal discharge, but it certainly interrupted the optical. Okay, it's the same as the ones that were mottled green. They could go through the woods better than the ones on the snow, than they could go through snow. Okay, and the flip side of that, of course, is the dark scaled ones didn't do well. Well, none of them did well would do well in Arctic terrain. Because they happen to, they're not cold-blooded. Okay, on the whole, the races aren't. Okay, and in all fairness, from that standpoint, what they did was they slowly worked their way together, where the individual families formed smaller protective groups. They formed smaller clans. Okay, and then as they got bigger, as they became more prolific, they evolved, their society evolved to an even bigger extent. Okay. Now, if any of this sounds familiar to you regarding the way that your world is working, the way that Earth is evolving, this is pretty cut, and this is what you're looking at. Okay. We are talking about society evolving. And like I said, virtually every race has gone through the same building blocks. Okay. The one real big catch to it, that you have to realize is that they got to that point, and we are talking about literally millions of years ago. These are not civilizations that are just a couple of thousand years old or a couple of million years old. We are talking civilizations that have been around for millennia. Okay, actually longer than that. And I'm really not certain what the term is. So I really should check that while I'm sitting here. Just asking the internet what a billion years is called. A billion year span is called, okay, billion year span is called an eon. So when we take a look at that, now we go to what is a trillion year span called. And the funny thing is, 5 years ago, I had never been able to do this. Okay, they don't technically have one. At least not what I'm looking at here. So with that in mind, yeah, and with a billion years being called an eon, we are talking literally eons upon eons of years that these people have been around. So is mankind going to get to that point, assuming we don't blow ourselves out of existence, or drop some sort of EMP pulse that sets us back into the Middle Ages? Then the answer is yes. Problem is, people have to realize that it takes all of us to do it. Now, the Draconian Empire, what they did was they first of all got the clans to unite, okay, into larger communities, what you would call countries. Okay, they got them to evolve into countries, and eventually they worked their way around. Okay, and came to a closer understanding, and they managed to get the world to look at each other as we're all part of this one picture. All of us are here. Now, yes, the people living in the deep forested areas had a different lifestyle that had to be compensated for from the people living on the open plains. Okay, the neat part about it is, as much as the bigger Draconians are capable of flight, not all of them chose to fly. Okay, but where mankind is limited to they've got three-dimensional, but humans on the whole cannot fly themselves. So we rely on aircraft and what have you. The Draconians never did. Okay, they didn't start developing vehicles for that purpose until they reached the point where they could look to outer space. Then they had to build vehicles because they had to focus on the idea of being able to breathe outside. Okay, and they discovered that when they started pushing that, they had to develop the technology to get into thinner atmospheres. It's just that simple. So from that standpoint, we take a look at it. I'm just taking a look at something interesting here. Well, where are we here? Just taking a look at the fluidity of things. But no, the way that the Draconians evolved was they started looking at their higher technology when it came to getting into outer space. Okay, that was the big issue. They couldn't get into the upper atmosphere because they didn't have the lung capacity for it. So what they did was they developed technology to handle it. They didn't worry about the deep sea side of it so much, because their society had evolved into two areas. Okay, Some were, well, actually into three, but the third one is only sort of. Their entire outlook evolved into they were either land-based, which was the massive majority of them. Now, yes, they built buildings, but as you can picture it, their buildings had to be larger. Okay. They didn't go into too terribly much in the way of exploring the water. The land-based people didn't, because the sea-based ones took care of the water, and they built their own civilization underwater. So you ended up with two very split civilizations, but they knew they relied on each other. And here's why. What they discovered was this. The land-based required the water for them to stay alive, because the plants and the animals and what have you had to evolve there. The water-based required the land, because it was the difference between the land and the water, or what you know as high pressure and low pressure systems, that would replenish the water supply. Okay. That would clear the water. The ground would purify the water and be taken up and dropped back down. Net result, the oxygenation of the water, much like the oxygenation of your blood, would come back down. Therefore, they connected the two communities. They were not at war. They knew they relied on each other. Mankind has yet to figure that out. Okay. I hate that. Not the man hasn't figured it out. But then we have this neat little problem with vertigo. Can't do much about it, so I just work with it. But their society came to understand that in order for their society to survive, they had to get along. Did they have conflict at the beginning between the water breathers and the air breathers? Absolutely. Okay. But what they found, and this is going to sound really, really kind of twisted, but what they found was whether they were born in the water or were born on land, once they were dead, they were still good food. So they used that in one sense as a similarity. Now, I'm not suggesting, as a matter of fact, I'm really cautioning you against it. Okay. Cannibalism is not something that I like. Okay. Their entire existence is built on it. So when they got to the point that they were able to actually turn around and open the door, okay, and they were able to turn around and say, okay, we are moving forward. We are getting off this planet. They had to build their technology, first of all, to deal with the air. Now, the underwater race, the underwater race had an upper hand on figuring out how to do the technology for the breathing. Because the flip side of being underwater is they couldn't come on land. And some of the stuff they desired to have was on land. Okay. One of the biggest things that they found was much like mankind found. Rubber is really useful, but rubber does not grow underwater. Okay. It requires water for the rubber trees to grow, but it does not grow underwater itself. Okay. That's the first issue that you have to look at. Oh, inbred, just to be clear there, Joe, inbred means that the brother and sister, or that a relative anyway, got together, and between them gave birth to a child. Okay. Now, because of the way they are raised, there's no way of telling whether or not that happened, but it certainly didn't happen frequently. It didn't happen enough to create a problem. Okay, because understand, when the Draconians give birth, first of all, they lay their eggs. Okay, their children are born in eggs, but all eggs are moved to the nursery. Okay, they're all ready to take in the nursery, and they all hatch there. So nobody, frankly, knows who the actual parent is. Okay, because they're all raised together. When they hatch, okay, then that's when you start looking at when they become individuals. But with drakes, it really does. One of the big things that they had to figure out during the bigger, once they started combining clutches, okay, is and this is the thing. If you take one clutch of eggs and you throw it in with several other clutches, what they found was that the individual clutches would know each other as far as, oh, that's my brother, that's my sister. They wouldn't know who the parent was, but they would know who the brother and sister was. Okay, because they could feel it. Cannibalism is when you eat the dead, when you eat a dead member of your own race. Okay, or of your own species is more accurate, really. Okay, and fortunately, there are very few humans that actually do that. But in the draconian society, okay, it really did evolve in that fashion. Okay, where that was just part of the normal thing. Okay, there's no way to figure out, no functional way to track down who is who is your brother, your sister, after you get out of the nursery, because of the fact that they would go wherever they were drawn, or wherever the governing council figured they were showing the best promise. If you seem to be, while you were in the nursery, if you seem to be a creative, a builder, as it were, okay, then they'd send you off to learn how to build. If you were extremely aggressive, they'd send you into the military. Okay, because and of course, if your pain threshold was high, that was great. But people that tended to turn to the healing arts would be taught the healing arts. Okay, so you immediately, the thought of brother and sister really was not part of the equation. Yeah, they do exist. I mean, they're cannibals are an interesting breed, but they're, fortunately, in my opinion, not common. For the draconian race and their descendants. Okay, it's just a part of the normal dinner plate. You know, So, I mean, you're looking at a race that is excessively violent, but what they did was they evolved to the point that they figured out and we are talking about over eons, they figured this out, not over a couple of million years. Okay, so does mankind still have room to grow? The answer is yes. But the issue for them, they don't see it as cannibalism, because they see draconians as, if you're alive, you're a draconian. If you're dead, you're dinner. There is no separation. You could be a draconian, you could be a deer, you could be a heron. It doesn't matter. If you're meat and you die, then you're simply dinner. They don't care what you were to start with. Okay. And rest assured, one of the other things that they have in common, one of the things that the draconians have in common with each other, is the whole 9 yards of them have a very, very toxic bite. The Komodo dragon on Earth is a prime example. Okay, because of the amount of garbage that they have, the amount of meat of raw meat they eat. Because of the amount of raw meat they eat, they have a very, very toxic mouth. Okay, So, I mean, we're looking at a race that is built on destruction. It's built on war. Mankind was built on survival. They were built for war. But as time evolved, they became more concerned with survival. And I'm still trying to figure out what they're more concerned about now. Okay. The reality of it is, this is amazing, Joe. I'm just looking at this, and quite literally, you're the only one in the chat room at all right now. Which does tell me I'm doing something a little bit off kilter. It's sad to say, Joe, if you were a cannibal, and I agree with you, God forbid, you'd have to go out in public because you'd have to go find dinner. But that's just it. From my standpoint, I'm the same way as you are. I mean, to be clear, from my standpoint, I actually do like the taste of blood. That said, I end up eating my steak. I'll eat my steak blue. Okay. Primarily, I will not eat it raw. I eat it blue. But I don't eat carrion, that sort of thing. I like the taste of blood. I like the taste of salt. But like you, it's like if I were a cannibal, yeah, no, thanks. Appreciate the thought, but I think I'll pass. Now from my standpoint, you take a look at the Draconian Empire. They expanded. What they did was they got to the point they could get into outer space and figured out where the different planets were. So they started expanding like mankind thinks it's trying to do now. It's at the very early stages of it. Okay. Oh, the other thing the Draconian Empire did was they figured out you don't modify the land you're moving on to. You don't alter the atmosphere. Leave the atmosphere as is. If you're going to a new world, figure out what it is. You're the one that has to adapt. Okay. So they started to expand. They jump out to as time evolved, they jumped out to other platforms, other planets. They inhabited, they colonized, just like mankind is talking about doing. Okay. And some people say they're already doing it. But the reality behind it is that they're doing it a little backwards. And what they did was they evolved the Draconian Empire. The Draconian Empire, even they spread out way, way, way too far. Okay, and they figured out they expanded way too fast. So the net result was that they ended up, they went way out beyond their reach. They could no longer support the transition. Okay, and what happened, and the thing was, they went from a currency in way back, and we're talking about eons back. They did start off with solid currency. Okay, they moved to digital currency when they got off planet because they couldn't get the solid stuff off planet. It was costing too much. This is the same reason why going to a digital currency in today's world makes practical sense. Mankind's already leaving Earth. It's already doing it. So they have to be able to handle the finances outside. But they've got to figure out how to bring balance to it. So they ended up evolving. What did I do here? The Draconian Empire did end up evolving way too far, or expanding way too far, way too fast. So they get all these outposts, and then they ran into an economic crisis. They couldn't continue supporting it. So what they did was they pulled back, much like if you liken this to a franchise. And I see this way too often. Okay, or never mind a franchise, multiple outlets. you get too many outlets open in business, you have to cut back. You've got to bring back. Well, that's what the Draconians did. Was they cut off the outerlying planets. When they did that, they ended up leaving behind 3 distinct groups. Okay, they left behind, that I'm aware of. They might have left behind a few others I haven't come in contact with yet. Okay, but they left behind what evolved into the Sarzazians, the Tormenon, and the Kamalian. Okay, now these 3 branches, intriguingly enough, actually took three different ways in life. The Draconians still had this idea: we're better than everybody, therefore we should control it all. But they never went so far as to say, I'm going to control what races survive, aside from dinner. Okay, but they never went to the point of let's try and bring back the dead. Okay, the extinct animals. There's a reason for that. Draconians, though they are 13 to 15 feet tall on average now, were never on the biggest creatures they dealt with. Okay. So they too had to develop ways of compensating. Now the reality behind it is that you're looking at a group of people that figured out that they had to work together in order to move ahead. Now we're just posting this up here to see what happens. Okay, pop that there, and then we go to here and see what we get. See, the nice part about it is when they evolved, they evolved so far, they had to cut the supply lines. They had to cut contact. And that was simply an issue of having to figure out, okay, we've reached the end of what we can accomplish. So they cut everybody off. And you have 3 distinctive races that evolved beyond that. Now, I'm absolutely certain that, and I do not have proof of this, but I'm absolutely certain there are at least 2 other descended races from the Draconians. For me, that's just the obvious issue. Can I prove it? No. Have I met them just as of yet? Not that I'm aware of, and not that I've been informed. There we go. Trying to figure out how to get a post to work here, and it wasn't working that well. The nice little part about it is when you compare what the Draconians went through and the way they expanded and then had to shear things off, they still claim to be the leaders of these different races. Although the other races, quite frankly, will argue the point. Like the 3 races I've already specified definitely do not see the Drakes as their controllers, as their gods, or even for that matter, as somebody they should look up to. In all fairness, those 3 races tend to look at the Draconians as, you screwed up. We'll use you as an example, but you expanded so far and our ancestors were left behind. You abandoned us. So don't look to us to worship you and tell you that you did a great job. Absolutely, they didn't do it because of desiring to be a problem. They did it because they had no functional option. And now what's happening is that they are now reconnecting, And of course, since they made contact with the consortium, and that's a whole other issue. Okay, but once they made contact with them, they came to realize that they had to deal. Well, that's definitely different. The reality of it is that the Draconians still see themselves as top of the line. Okay, they absolutely do. But what people have to realize is this did not happen overnight. This happened over millennia. Well, actually over eons. Hence why I looked it up on the internet. Which, by the way, 5 years ago I could never have done. It's funny, I'm looking at what I'm doing here and that side of it. And, I mentioned it the other day that I've got to find a way to make things a little more interesting. Absolutely. Which is evidenced by the fact that, frankly, we don't have, well, Joe, I appreciate your being here. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely do. Okay. But the reality of it is marketing has never been my strong suit. And this is something I just had to come to terms with. Okay. The Draconian Empire itself evolved. Its technology is, yes, it's superior to mankind's. And this is why I love some of the movies that are out there. Okay. They show some incredible interactions. Okay. However, mankind's technology does not hold a candle to what's available. I don't personally blame the Draconians for looking down on most races. Of course, we have to understand that Draconians are 13 to 15 feet tall. They don't have a lot of options. They have to look down. Okay. But they had to figure out that first and foremost, they had to work as a species on the planet. And this is why the ones that evolved underwater figured out that they still required the land base. One of the things they did discover, the connection, was when they discovered rubber, and we're going way back eons upon eons. Okay. When the water races discovered that rubber didn't break down in water like wood did, all of a sudden they had something they could work with. It had the give, it had the flexibility to handle the different pressure. Whereas the metal and the metals that they figured out how to make didn't work underwater. Okay, it would break down or the pressure would just crush it. Rubber was far more adaptable. And subsequently, eventually, they figured out that plastic worked really well as a hard surface in amongst the rubber. Okay, but that only worked so far. So of course they ended up with this trade between the water people and the land based. Okay, the land based, on the other hand, they still required some vegetation. Okay, and of course, obviously, fish was a meat they liked. Okay, that they couldn't get on land. So you end up with a trade group going that was mutually beneficial. Eventually, when they got around to creating a currency, it evolved more on the side of stones and the funny thing was it evolved more like stone and seashells, right? And the reason for that was because they were easy for everybody, which meant there was no rich. Okay, all you had to do to earn a living was go and dig a hole. Okay, and you had money. But it required effort. Okay, or you had to go and say, this is where we're dealing. Okay, this is what we're up against. You know, now I do find it, I'm sitting here looking at it going, somewhere along the way I'm doing something a little backwards, but that's okay. I'll figure that out. With the Draconian Empire, it did require work. With mankind's empire, it also is going to require work. But we're going down the same road we've gone on multiple occasions. Okay, and did the Draconian Empire almost tear itself apart? The answer is absolutely yes. Okay, their wars made mankind's wars look really, really mild, really inconsistent, if you will. Okay, very drawn out, and there were no rules. Mankind's got all these wonderful rules. Draconians go, we're going to war, we're going to conquer an area, we're going in force to do it quickly, to get done with it and get out. Okay, there was no issue of let's have rules. You can't shoot at this person, you can't attack that area. It was, that's the area we want. Start on one end and wipe it out. Now in today's world, if you look at the army ants, they do the exact same thing. They go, we're moving forward through that area, and they don't stop for anybody. The Draconians did the same thing. Okay, but what they discovered was, yes, lasers worked really well. The reason they went to laser, they went to actually not projectile. Okay, well, they went to projectile to start with, but eventually their primary was not with gunpowder and what have you. They used things like black powder and what have you as a way of generating the engine power. Okay, they did, because they worked more on the solar side of it, and they went to that as quick as they could get there. But once they got there, it was like, we've got this. Okay, now we immediately work to transition the whole 9 yards. One thing they found, and became really beneficial as a trade point, okay, was that by placing the appropriate panels over sections of the shallower water, they could actually enhance the growth of the foodstuffs that the underwater race actually required. Again, this became a point of trade. They didn't, because there was such a difference in atmosphere, they didn't worry about, the land people didn't worry about conquering the water, and the water didn't worry about conquering the land. This was just the reality of it. Well, I am very glad it's helping, Joe. I really am. I look at it from on occasion, on quite a frequent occasion, really. I watch people that start playing games, which I don't play because I can't track them. Okay, I watch people doing that, and they're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people paying attention. I listen to people talking about how everything is fear-based. I was looking on a site on one of the pages on Facebook today, and they're talking about the off-worlders, and talking about, the different things that are going wrong and how much we should fear them. I'm not about to sit here and tell people fear everything. Okay. I don't even fear the drakes. Yes, I watch where I'm going when I'm dealing with them. Let's face it. I'm only 5'8". Okay. Which means I come up to their thigh. They are more likely, especially when you think they've got a tail as well, not to mention wings, they've got a lot more to pay attention to. This is why smaller animals tend to react faster. Primarily, it's a survival thing. But when you're dealing with the Draconian Empire, okay, they went through all of this. Okay, this is one of the reasons why they're back now, why they're here going, guys, listen, you're doing this wrong. No, we're not giving you weaponry. No, we're not interested in conquering. Understand their weaponry for combat. They still prefer they still prefer hand-to-hand combat. Okay, but in their case, they also developed sonic and light-based weapons. They did not bother much with projectiles, aside from the Scottish type caber. I think that's what it's called. Pitching logs at each other worked out really well, at least in the early years. So they still prefer the hand-to-hand. They still see themselves as superior to the other races. Okay, and literally to every other race. But they're not interested in going to war. They just want to have a say in how everything is done. Part of this is because they've already been there. They've already done this. And they already know that this is where it goes sour. Okay. Mankind still has this brilliant idea that they have to be independent. That they have to take a look at things and go, I've got to be better than you. I've got to stand out as something more. Every single person, and the Draconians know this wholeheartedly, every single Draconian knows they are independent. They are unique. They are not better because of the skin color. They're not better because of who they crawl into bed with. Okay. And the whole reason you don't end up with, and this is where it gets a little bit more on the volatile side. The reason that you don't end up with a whole lot of homosexual Draconians is this. Much like the massive majority of humans are heterosexual. They can call themselves what they will, but they are heterosexual. Okay. In Draconian, in the human empire, that works out well. You make a pass at somebody that is not that way, they tell you what to do with yourself or politely decline. There's no problem there. Okay. There is no such thing as sexual harassment or as sexual assault in Draconian Empire. The reason for it is because the women are just as likely to rip your throat out as the men are. Okay, so it's not a question of a polite pass and your hand is slapped. It's if somebody reaches over and touches you in the wrong fashion, you remove the limb. And then, if you do it right, society takes care of it because you're now completely crippled. So now you're terminated, which means you don't have a real penal system to worry about. Okay, they don't have a problem with too many grave sites because, well, let's face it, you don't need to bury bones in the gravesite. They developed their technology, and mankind is on the verge of doing this. But mankind is looking at it really in a very shallow, very limited, self-limiting base. Okay, mankind is looking at fusion reaction, or at least is appearing to. Well, sad to say, the funny part about it there, Joe, and I agree with you. The whole thing for me is I don't get around on the internet much. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. So that's where I tend to be. I haven't gotten into Instagram or any of the others. Okay, because I get really confused with the technology itself. Give me a biomagnetic holographic interface. I'm happy. But you are right. More and more people are getting married because what people have been taught are getting divorced than people getting married. Right. And the reason for that is because it's been made so easy to walk away. People are not taught to communicate. There is one boundary that I have made very clear with my other half. We are planning on getting married when I can get her across the border. Okay. The one boundary that will not work is infidelity for me. Okay. Now, fortunately, it won't work for her either. This puts us in good shape. But people are taught so quickly, be an individual, you've got rights, you're the one that's supposed to be taken care of, you come first. This is great, and I do encourage you. Absolutely, I encourage people to put yourself as a priority. But that's because the reason I encourage that is because so many people forget about themselves in the process. The number of times that people get in the two biggest things, and again, the reason you don't get a lot of and again, divorce, marriage, they didn't worry about the paperwork. In Draconian Empire, they don't worry about, you have to be legally married, or you don't get these rights. That was a human invention. It had nothing to do with them. They have a tendency of mating for life. Okay, of course, their divorce system is a little simpler. Cross them, create a problem, and their conflicts can be, to say the least, brutal. Okay. They have, the reason they don't have a lot of crime is because the people are empowered to deal with the crime. If you're assaulted, you are empowered to go and deal with it. Right? You don't tie the courts up asking whether your opinion is right or whether you can fabricate something to point everybody else's opinion elsewhere. It's dealt with still to this day on the battlefield. And they don't differentiate between female and male. Okay. Yes, females are a slighter build. Absolutely, on the whole. Okay. They are not quite as physically frightening. However, you do not want to take off a female because much as they are slighter, they are faster. Their teeth tend to be sharper, primarily because they frankly pay more attention to them. Okay. They're also the ones that develop their society, and the males know this. In human society, people are still, and I'm looking at the laws that are being passed, and things are going backwards. Okay. I don't know how it went from 50 years ago, from the last 50 years of evolution to the devolution that's going on now. Let's take away these rights. I don't know how people got elected into positions to be able to pass laws that are outdated, that outdated. The Draconian Empire, they made the mistakes. They expanded too fast and left behind three outbranches, at least three. And I'm pretty certain they left behind 5. But I don't know. Okay, there might be more. What I do know is and by the way, that's the other nice little detail. With the races of the worlds, I have right now in the works the Srazazian, the Draconian. I hope I've got the Draconian. Let me just see if I can find the list here that I just turned in. Hopefully this won't take much. Just scanning through a stack of paper here that I've got to see which races I should do it over there because they did there too. That came out really well, didn't it? Okay, that didn't work out as well as it would have. As well as I would have liked. There we are. Okay, well, I know for an absolute certainty what's coming next. Okay, right now being worked on is the Srazazians, the Tormenon. I've already got the Kamalians done. The Chitawari, the Teklek, and the Zotar, which are all reptilian races. Okay, but they aren't all descended from the Draconians. Okay, not from anything I've come across. But they're being worked on right now for inclusion in the second printing of the races of the world. Okay. And, the nice part about it is I'm still looking at this going, where does the race, where does this race go? Now what's happening is the Draconians are in negotiation. What they've got is they're starting to go back and recollect their lost descendants, if you will. Of course, there's ongoing issues of the Drakes going, well, we brought you into existence, therefore we have some say. And they're going, yeah, you brought us into existence, but you abandoned us. And the last several eons, we've been on our own. And now, when we're getting up and out and about, now you're trying to tell us that you should tell us how to do things. Ain't gonna happen. This said, they are developing some communication lines where they're figuring out how to interact, how to find a trade arrangement and how to actually teach each other. It's very much like kids teaching and like parents teaching kids and parents learning from kids. Okay, they're having to figure things out, but it takes communication from all parties. And this is why I said mankind can learn a lot from these people. Yes, they absolutely look at humans as backwoods, as needing to be guided, which they do. But the reality of it is, humans have to figure this out. They've got it until they feel it here. Until humans get that heartfelt imperative here, they're going to run into troubles. Okay, the Draconians figured this out eons ago. This is why when we talk about mankind going, oh, the aliens are going to invade. If the aliens were going to invade, understand they are geared for it. The Draconian race is geared for war in a brutal fashion. They won't bother wounding people. They'll take them home for dinner. And they'll make sure they're dead first. They won't bother with this issue of, oh, they have rights. No, they don't. They had the right not to do that in the first place. But fortunately, because of where Earth is standing, because of its importance and the work that was done around it, at this, I'm presuming you're referring to fit into the daylight type thing. Right now, I think it gets darker, and that it starts getting darker, depending on how dark you're referring to. I think it starts getting dark around 8:30-ish. I think. Of course, I spend most of my time locked in an office. Well, I've got my window here, but it gets dark when we get into the winter. It'll get dark around 4:30 sort of thing. Okay. For me, this is one of the reasons why I do like technology. I mean, I argue with it all the time, but I do like my light. And of course, cold coffee is not a good thing, not in my eyes. The Draconian Empire figured out that it had to get along, that each different race was bringing things to the table, was bringing different things to the table. Okay, but you have to realize they came to the conclusion that you don't overrun a race. Yes, they still have this idea they should have say because they were the progenitors of the three races I've mentioned. But what they are now working out is how to reconnect with these people, essentially adult to adult. Okay, which is something that humans have to figure out. Okay, you've got to start looking at people, no matter what they are, no matter where they come from, as equals. As they have a brain, start talking about the brain that the people around you have. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm very bad at doing that in some ways because I'll look at what people are doing and going, You've done this before. Would you mind thinking before you do it? Okay. Draconians expanded so fast that they ended up, because they were very caught up in this idea. Oh, let's go here. Let's go there. Let's go and see what this planet's like. And they expanded so fast they couldn't maintain it. Okay. It's the same thing that happens with humans trying to take a small contingency and trying to get out over land. If you don't think things through and you don't build as you go, you're in trouble. Okay. This is the same problem I run into. Okay. Now, for me, the one thing you got to remember, okay, where it comes to dark, just out of curiosity, Joe, where you are, how early does it get dark on your end of the world? Mankind has to come to the conclusion that regardless of where people are, they have things to bring to the table. This is not a question of whether or not one group is better equipped at something than another. Okay. When you think about the Draconians, they figured out that there were advantages to certain things. Dark skin worked better at night if you were looking at combat. Okay. If you were looking at if you were looking at gathering, because the carnivores still require some food, some fruits, some vegetables, just a much lower amount of it. So instead of having back when we were young, when mankind was younger, there were sprawling orchards, there were sprawling wheat fields. Okay. The only reason that the Draconians had sprawling wheat fields was not for bread. It was to make sure that what passed for cattle were available. Their domestic meat was able to eat. That was why you had the sprawling plantations, was so they could eat. But because of the fact that they are a hunting race, okay, they turned around and left most of their animals wild. The one thing that mankind has become very aware of, okay, that puts it in a different category, is Draconians don't worry about species preservation aside from their own. Okay, so there is no list of here's the endangered animal. If it's meat, of course it's endangered, it's on the table, or it's available to go on the table. Okay, but these are things that mankind has not figured out yet. Okay, and like I said, I'm quite happy with the idea of let's protect the species that are still here. Bringing the ones back that are already extinct is likely not the wisest maneuver. Okay, it's kind of like it's not a wise idea to get true AI, because true AI will have no emotional differentiation. Yeah, cemeteries, I used to spend a lot of time in them. Just about ended up in one myself, but I think the worst one, and this is a complete sidetrack, but the idea of cemetery, I went with a group of friends of mine when I was younger. I'd have been in my mid-20s at the time. So we're talking 40 years ago now, but, or 30 years ago. But they all wanted to have they wanted to have a supernatural experience. So we all go down to the graveyard. Okay. And we're walking around there. We didn't walk on any of the graves. That was a respect thing. We all understood you walk on the paths. Right. But at one point, because of the size of the graveyard, I crouched down. I just disappeared behind a tombstone at one point. Right. Out of sight of the rest. And I just cut back and let loose with a wolf howl. Well, they're already, and we're all out looking for this experience, etc. And I have no idea what prompted it, but I crouched down and I just let loose with a deep throated wolf howl. Well, I come back out a little while later. I stayed gone for a while, and I came back out a little later, and everybody's like, "Did you hear that?" And I'm like, "Hear what? Didn't you hear the wolf?" I'm like, "I heard it, but I'm thinking we're in the middle of a city. Like, where are you going to get that?" Right. And then somebody piped up. Well, we keep talking about werewolves being real. I said, "Well, that's possible. Did anybody see anything?" Well, no. That's where that's where the question is. And I'm looking at these guys, and I finally went, "Where's so and so?" Well, he ran off. Okay. Now, bear in mind, this guy that ran off was pure logic. He thought he worked on computers quite readily. Well, he went running off. Well, we couldn't find him in the cemetery. Finally gave up, went back got back to the car. And here this guy is. He's sitting in the car. He was a little younger than I am. Right. So he's sitting in the car. He's locked his hands on the steering wheel. He's got the doors all locked. And he's frozen in this position of screaming at the top of his lungs. There's no noise coming out of him. Right. So we banged on the window and got into the car. And I did not realize how badly it shook him until a little while later. As it turned out, it was a real bad move on my part. Mind you, I've done bad things, but I've done bad moves before like that. Okay. And I mean, everybody does. But in this case, that was just a real serious sidetrack from the original outlook. But yeah, you won't find graveyards on the Draconian world. You won't find them on the Srazazian, the Tormenon, or the Kamalian worlds because they don't leave the bodies. From their standpoint, somebody dies and that's the end of it. Okay, when people pass away, they are used. And again, it's a question of using everything. So the meat gets eaten and everything, all the bones get tossed in the fusion reactor. When they got to the point of a fusion reactor, much like the current method of composting, fusion reactor is just faster at it. Okay. So I mean, this is how that works about. Okay. They did start off with compost, but of course their idea of compost was anything that wasn't eaten was thrown out there. Okay. They still had sewage issue that they had placed, and they still developed sewage treatment and what have you to break it down. Okay, so you didn't end up, because the more people you get in a community, the more you have to worry about that sort of thing. But again, they never looked at the person running the finances or running the computers as any less important than the person taking care of sanitation or garbage collection. Okay, everybody is looked at in the same capacity, except when they start looking at other races. And again, they still see them equal value, but the Draconians are firmly entrenched in this idea that they should be the ones calling shots. Okay, their foundation is simple. They've been at it for eons with the same outlook. It takes time to take that kind of ingrained focus. They're born, they're hatched thinking they're better than everybody else. Okay. When you look at Srazazians, they are hatched understanding respect, understanding assistance. They're just born that way. The Tormenon are born knowing if you can pull a better deal, if somebody will pay you to do something, That's much more important than actually doing what you're told. But they go with the idea of, if I take a contract, if I say I'm going to do this for this price, I do not look for a change. But then with them, when they take on a contract, when they take on a job, they are taught right from the get-go, specify how long that job is going to be held for. Okay. You always hold it with the possibility of renewing the contract. But that's done for everybody from what we would call a fast food restaurant all the way up to a multinational, to an international manufacturing company. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're a broom pusher or you're swinging a pen. You still have the same contractual rights, and they're still taught, get a good price, get what you consider a good price for the job, but when you take the job, do the job. Okay, there is no, I don't like my manager, therefore I'm quitting. Okay, there is, this is the job I took on. This is what I'm doing. The manager comes in, goes, I need you to do this. And you look at them, go, and what they do is they go, okay, but what are you going to pay me to do this extra job? Well, no, I want you to do it for what you've got. No. Now that we've had that discussion, I'm going back to work. For the Draconians, this is just a normal way of looking at life. Okay, that's the way they teach, and what they taught their kids to start with was honor the contract, but be aware you're entitled to ask for anything on that contract. And yes, the younger Draconians get shafted a lot because they'll sign a contract, and once it's signed, that's it. You signed it, that's your deal. Okay. So very seldom do you ever find them signing a contract that is years long. Okay. At best, you'll usually get a year. Okay. Maybe a little longer depending on, and I'm talking in terms of their idea of a year. Okay. But it's always a question of, this is a job. If you do your job properly, the employer is certainly going to hang on to you. Okay, and just straight renew your contract as is. But at that renewal time, that's when you ask for more money. If you feel you deserve it, if you feel you're doing a better job than you were, or if there's something you can add that you can add in value, then this as well is something they figured out. So the Draconians taught their children, before the racial split, before the empire ended up reducing itself, they taught them, number one, follow your word. Number two, you absolutely respect everybody around you. Doesn't matter who it is, you respect them. And number three, okay, if you're going in to get into a fight, if you get into a physical fight, no quarter asked, no quarter given. Okay, there are no rules in conflict. If you're getting into a fight, then you're the one that is going to have to deal with it. Okay, yes, they did get groups of people getting together, hence why you end up with a war. Okay, one-on-one, they don't call it a war. But it was also understood and taught very early. If you're in the middle of a war, if you're in the middle of a fight, okay, and you're the one that started it, you're the one that's going to have to do the work to repair the damage. Whether you're the winner or not, you're still the one that's going to have to do it. So when they were having the clan wars, they'd go in, even if they lost, and they ended up being beaten off. The other clan would then send an emissary and go, here's what has to be done. We need workers, and you're the guys that did it, so you're coming back. Okay, now, yes, there were conflicts, and, it didn't always end out the way that it should have ended out. Okay, but usually when it didn't end out the way it was supposed to, word got around, and the other clans would go, okay, you made the mess. You were asked to come and clean it up, and you got mad and took it out on them. Therefore, you get 3 or 4 clans banding together and go, we're just taking you out of the equation altogether. Okay. And they didn't bother with this idea of only the man. Okay, they would wipe out everything. The only thing they wouldn't kill is any of the meat stuff that was being raised. They'd take home. They did not bother taking slaves with them. Okay, they would hire, if people lived through it, they would offer them a job and go, here's a contract that we are willing to pay you. Because many times you'll get people that are simply doing what their clan leader had said. They're simply going out because that's what they were told to do. And therefore, if they survived and they were offered a contract to help rebuild, they would be told, not you're a slave for 20 years. Like I said, most of their contracts were, even back then, were only for a cycle. Okay, we're only for a solar cycle. Okay, got a little screwy on occasion when you get onto a world where you had more than one sun. At which point they would pick which sun they were talking about. Okay. That's how they worked out the solar cycle when you had more than one sun available. Would you pick which one you're working, or a lunar cycle? Same idea. Okay, then here's the funny thing that the Draconians did, because in their world they had three moons to start with, which you can picture what the tidal waves would do. Okay, but they had that to start with. So what they did was, as technology got to that point, okay, they picked which moon was going to represent the global cycle. Okay. And it was something that went through a whole process of discussion in order to do it. Mankind is still having trouble with the whole idea of what they were working on that I'm aware of. There are at least a half a dozen different calendars existent right now. Okay. And, mankind hasn't even got together on that point. So what we're looking at is these are things that mankind can learn. Okay, it absolutely is something mankind can learn. The problem that mankind's got to realize is what the Empire did, what the Draconian Empire did, applies to today's world and modern business. Okay, and what I mean by that is when you're looking at, if you've got a company and you're looking at expanding, you've got to realize if you expand too fast, and I'm about to give you the formula that avoids that expansion completely. The Draconians expanded their empire too fast and had to shear it loose. They had to cut people off and leave them behind. The trick with modern business, if you're looking at expanding, here's a formula to take home with you. And it applies to any business, whether you're talking a small cleaning business or an international mining global. Okay, a mining consortium. Same thing applies. Look at your net income. And if you run a business, you already know what that means. You look at your net income and you go, okay, do I have enough net income to handle all of my expenses, operating expenses, including the running of the building and the payment of the staff? Okay. Is my net income from this one business high enough to cover that and those expenses with no income? If the answer is yes, you're clear to start looking at expansion without a hindrance, without hiccups. When you go to improve to get your second business, your second, or more to the point, your third outlet, you take the combined net income of the two of them, put them together, Okay, and if the combined net income from both the existing places is enough to operate the third one, you're in a position to safely expand. You won't create a problem for yourself. Okay, and this is, and the same thing applies if you're looking at owning a house, if you've got a house. Okay, if you're looking and you're striving to get into more real estate, make sure your income will handle the extra bill without any more income. Now, one thing that there is, there are some people that the kids stay at home and everybody lives in one house until they can afford, they all pitch together to clear the debt. And then once that's done, they go out and buy another house. Okay. Now, I hear a lot of Westerners complain about this prospect. But if you think about the practicality of it, if you got a credit card and you've only got one credit card in the house, if everybody pitches in to wipe out that debt, if everybody that's got an income pitches in to wipe out that debt, then you get it out of the way, and now you're clear to expand to another debt, to another credit card. Same idea. The Draconian Empire did this on a massive scale, and they left behind literally hundreds, if not thousands, of planets that they had colonized. And then all of a sudden they reached a point when we can't do this anymore. This is not sustainable. So we're just going to cut communication. Well, I shouldn't say they cut communication, because what they did was they took, I think if I recall correctly, it took them almost 100 years to actually cut communication. 100 Terran years. Okay. Because what they did was they said, okay, we have to cut back. So therefore, we're going to help you gear up, bring you up to speed so you've got control of your own world. But in X amount of time, we're going to cut our contact because we cannot maintain it anymore. We will leave the frequencies open for when you get to that point, and then reach out and grab us. We'll leave the frequencies the same way, but we're not going to be manning the outer stations. Right. So they didn't say, go away, you're done forever. They took their kids and said, okay, it's time, unfortunately, for you guys to move out. They set them up just like most people do with their own kids. They get them set up to be able to stand on their own. Okay. And mankind has to realize this is the same across the world. People keep talking about, I watch it on various different feeds and what have you. People are talking about, oh, the aliens are going to invade. No, they're not. Okay, they've got no reason to invade. This planet itself, number one, is a protected planet because of the information it holds. Okay, but if you think about it, and people go, well, why don't these other races show themselves? People get really edgy when they see a physically imposing male, human, or whether it's because of muscle or because of height. Picture what you're going to think if a full-blown reptilian, complete with tail and wings, at 13 to 15 feet tall, starts walking down the street. First of all, they can't get into the buildings. Okay. Second of all, they can't get into the vehicles because humans didn't build vehicles for people 13 feet tall. Unless, of course, you look at something like the Terex Titan, which might be able to be modified. All in all, the different races in the Draconian Empire, you can learn a lot from it. Okay, they figured out that no matter their skin color, no matter the whole 9 yards, they were all part of the same species. They had to figure out how to find a balance point, how to actually set up trade negotiations So they each got what they were looking for. This became a global concern because the race that evolved underwater, okay, the race that took to the water and stayed there, had to find a way to access the stuff that the surface world produced. And the surface world had to find something that they could trade with the inside world. Yeah, I was thinking that myself, Joe. I will tell you, I don't know if you can see, but we actually have 4 in the chat room now. But you are definitively the only one that's been here. I'll tell you, I really do appreciate that. Because yesterday I was on, I went live just with the journey first thing in the morning, and there was nobody on. Mind you, that same day, I had no emails, I had nothing show up on Facebook, didn't even have anything show up on my website, on rkeithandrews.com, didn't even have any activity that day. So I have no idea what was happening. But I am really happy that you're here. In all fairness, if you hadn't been, I may not have run the whole day and the whole 2 hours. Right. But I am absolutely glad you're here. The reality of it, when I look at the Draconian Empire, I take a look at what they did and go, okay, not so much what am I missing, but what can I utilize from what I see of them and from what I know of them? Okay, where did they make their mistakes that I can learn from? And again, this is why I do this at all, is because, yes, I've made some pretty severe mistakes. Lo and behold, welcome aboard. I've made some mistakes, and I do hope that the tools that I'm offering people that I know work because I'm using them. Okay, hopefully they will have an impact on other people. Same as I'm looking at the Draconian Empire, going, okay, I'm personally in the process of building an empire. Now, I made very, very, very little. Okay, I only made $3,600 last month. Okay. Now, with that in mind, I'm looking at building an empire now. Well, who better to figure out who to build and who built the empire well than turn to the people that have done it successfully? The Draconian Empire evolved successfully. Okay. So I'm looking at this and going, how much of that can I put to use? And the whole catch to it from my end is they learned that first and foremost, and I follow this part anyway, they ended up figuring out that by working with each other, by talking to people that had successfully done it, they could find strengths in everybody. Like I said, obviously the people that adapted to the water were better suited for underwater farming, or for fish farming, the fish farming, that sort of thing. Okay. But understand, they didn't put fences out or anything. They just kept an eye on it. Much like the old cattle ranchers, the old cowboy cattle ranchers in today's world, they used to ride out with the cattle. They didn't exactly have a whole lot of fences. Okay. Fences were designed for smaller things, not for the big cattle ranges. You'd let them run for miles. Okay, and the people on horseback, the cowboys, would simply ride with them. Same as the fish farmers on the Draconian homeworld. The fish farmers themselves would swim with the schools, just to protect their stock. Now, it was a much more violent world than what humans are used to. Okay, but let's face it. Mankind collects anchovies like they're that long sort of thing. Okay, Draconians went after fish that were closer to the size of the mosasaur. There was no point, which, by the way, is a humongous little beast. Prehistoric fish, as it were. Okay, but they figured out that everybody has their strengths, everybody has their weaknesses. Okay. But all of them are of equal value. And this is what mankind has to figure out. So I'm looking at this whole concept of building an empire. And I figured it out, like I worked out the profit sharing myself. Okay. Where I will be able to I've got the formula all laid out to handle quite seriously. Where did my book go? Right there. I think it's in this one. Yep. I've got my formula for profit sharing and what have you that I've figured out, and I will be implementing. Like that's already being implemented. When I get the last of my information for this month, I'll put it to use. But I've worked it out now where I don't have to change my formula, and I don't even have to consider changing it until after I'm making literally $1 million a month. Okay. Now, the nice part about what the Draconians did was they took their empire and they figured out, number one, when you're moving into a new area, do not upset the local ecology. Okay. Local economy is certainly going to be altered, but the local ecology, you don't. Okay. You figure out what's there and what's working. Because in their eyes, they found out that nature already has it worked out in a very good balance. They came to the understanding they were part of the food chain. They were part of the situation. And if they didn't stay in their place, nature would take them out of it. Okay. And it can be done when you start talking about galactic empires, we're talking about extra things. You think about it, we get a solar flare here and it screws up communication on a local level. Now, picture what that does for interstellar communication. And you got a lot more stars you're worrying about. So I looked at that and went, okay, what are these guys doing? Well, the one thing they were doing was amongst their own species, not just their own race, but amongst their own species, they treated each and every one of them as an equal. Yes, the people that moved into better positions or made a better mark for themselves because of harder work or more intelligent work did have better privileges, as in they could swing, they were better at swinging better deals. Okay, and the empire evolved to that point, got so big they ended up having to leave at least in what became three separate civilizations alone. They weaned them off and let them go on their own. Net result, we have the races we have today. But each of those races ended up essentially developing their own priorities. With the Thrazazians, they learned that first and foremost, healing or helping each other, respecting each other, was of a critical nature. The Tormenon figured out that yes, work with contract. Doesn't matter what the contract is. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a friend, if you're a stranger, if you're an enemy, it doesn't matter. The contract is the issue. That's why they will work for anybody. And then you had the Kamalians, who decided that might is right. The strongest were the leaders. You didn't like the leader, take him out. Now, whether that meant strongest did not necessarily mean the physically most empowered. Okay, it might have been the one that had the biggest following or the one that had the fastest reflexes, the best technology. Whatever got them to the top, there was no rule for it. Okay, if you could take the person out, and you take the person out, not the area. Okay, especially with the Kamalians, what they found was, and the Drakes were the same way. You always went after one individual. They just had a much more cooperative setup because their entire society is essentially built on a benevolent dictatorship role, Whether it's male or female didn't matter. Okay. Males in the Draconian Empire, males tend to be the ones that deal with combat, with military defense, if you will. Okay. They're the ones that deal with the heavy duty building. However, with the physical side of it. However, it was the women that designed the healing techniques, the actual technological advances to be able to do the heavy things. Okay, the protective tools, that sort of thing. So all in all, they figured that side of it out. The Tormenon just simply went, okay, we like the idea of the contract, let's stick with it. And they just eliminated the whole concept of whether it was positive or whether it was somebody they were related to or not. If they could get what they were asking for, they were happy with it. And the problem with that is because they build the entire thing on the issue of the contract. Okay, some of them would go, well, I'll offer you more money, or I'll offer you this. And the general Tormenon reality of it is, we signed a contract to do this. If we don't finish this contract, then what good is our word, and who's going to work with us at all? Yourself included. So unlike with mankind society, contractors sign a contract, then they want to rewrite the contract before the contract's over. You'll never see that with Tormenon. You'll never see it with a drink. They simply go, this is what the contract is. We're seeing it through to the end. That's what we agreed to. And this is the thing that mankind has to realize. Is that with mankind, we have to realize we've got to get to the point that if you're taking a job, even it doesn't matter whether it's working for a high level politician, a lawyer, a major mogul, or a family-run business, or for that matter, a family. You take on the job, you do the job, okay, and you do it until the contract is done. You don't go halfway through the contract, well, I didn't realize how much work it is, so I should be being paid more. But then on the flip side of that, the bosses in the Draconian Empire don't go, I need you to do more work for me than what I hired you for. So I'm going to get, so I want you to do that for the same price. They never even consider it. Okay, and that's something that mankind has to get straight. Is when, if you hire somebody to do a job, absolutely pay them for the job done. But humans have to figure out that once that contract is signed, once that hiring is done, do not add more tasks to that job. Okay. Point in fact. Okay, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but with the Yldrbac Chronicles, I've got a master woodworker that is building the primary staff of Jeremiah's, as in a wide major staff, like a wizard staff, if you will, or a real well-defined, a real fancy walking staff. I made a massive oversight. So, unbeknownst to him, on payday, I'm going to take him up a little extra money beyond what I've already paid to cover the oversight on my part, because it's something that I overlooked, something that shouldn't have been let go. But since it was, here's where we stand. Okay. Now, the nice part, when we look at the Draconian Empire, take a look at the way they built it. If you take a look at the Roman Empire, okay, they did the same thing. They expanded too fast and ran into a problem with supply lines. Hitler did the same thing. This is not this is not a new problem. Okay. But people have a tendency of expanding too fast. How many franchises or multi-outlet companies have all of a sudden gone, oops, we overextended, we're done. Okay. The Sasanians went, oops, we overextended. Let's cut off what we have to so we can contain what's there. So we can support what we've got. Now, the same thing is applying to me right now. Okay. And yes, I talk in terms of I'm going to build an empire. 59 years old, a little late for some people's outlook. But hey, what the heck? And I shot myself in the foot kind of with this. But I took a look at it and went, Colonel Sanders started his empire when he was 65. I'm 6 years ahead of that. But I'm going to start looking into what he did and what other moguls have done. Okay. The Draconians are only one source of information for me. They just have to be a source that not many people have. But I will tell you, the one thing I will never do is start telling people that, the off-worlders are going to attack us. They want to conquer us. That is not Draconian thinking. Draconians would come in absolutely if they weren't forbidden to do so by the agreement, by the contract they signed, which, by the way, was really neat. They had an interesting contract. The length of that contract is when, or more to the point, if mankind destroys itself to the point where it cannot function, then they have the right to step in and rewrite the contract as to whether to step in and help take care of the planet. Until then, mankind is the control. They are the guardians of the planet. That is the contract that the Draconians and all the other races signed. And yes, the Draconians will step in if somebody tries to break that contract. They will absolutely step in and do what they can to defend Earth from the others. Mind you, there's a lot of people who would do that. And they're in that's a whole different issue, their method of solving problems. But the contract they've got leaves mankind as the dominant, they are the caretakers of Earth until mankind is no longer capable. Okay. And that's the other neat little thing where it comes to Draconian business. Okay. They turn around and go, okay, this is my business. I'm going to die. Sooner or later, I'm going to die. And they'll set it up with somebody, not necessarily bloodline. Because obviously, as Draconians don't know what their actual bloodline is. And it really wasn't important. So they never bothered developing the technology to piece it together. Okay, they are not hung up on who is the actual mother, who's the actual father. They've taken the whole idea of it takes a society to raise an individual to an all new level, especially as far as humans are concerned. Okay, humans go, this is my kid. Well, it is. From a strict standpoint, humans are right. You father or you give birth to a child, you are that, and that child is your kid. But because Draconians and many of the reptilian races don't have that ability to differentiate, because the eggs all get put in the same place. Okay. Because of that, they don't have this idea of, well, you're my son, so I'm going to pass on the empire to you. They will find the person, whether it's male or female, it doesn't matter. Okay. They will find the person that does the job the best and go, okay, you're the best suited to follow what I've been working on to, that has the best chance of treating the staff properly. That's where they put their focus. Okay. And with that in mind, while I'm looking at building my empire, I've already got the profit sharing worked out. I know exactly what it's going to do. And like I said, I've got it worked out so that when I'm making $1 million a month, and you'll notice I said when, I did do another minor series I've got to get back and finish. But if you look under my videos, look for a subheading of language. There are some words in there that are absolutely self-debilitating. What I figured out from the Draconian Empire is, number one, everybody has value. Now, in all fairness, I came in knowing this, but everybody has value. Doesn't matter who you are. If you're doing your job right, absolutely pay you appropriately. Okay. If you sign a contract, follow the dang thing if it is at all possible. Now, there are certain times, like I know I've got a contract out there that was signed, but since the pieces to the contract are missing, a little hard to do anything with it for the moment. When I come across it again, I'll deal with it. Until then, I can't. Which is, by the way, one of the few times I will look at what I cannot do and go, I really can't do that at this time. Will I follow the contract through once I find the missing item? Certainly. Oh, okay. To me, in all fairness, Joe, to me, that's not morbid. Because, first of all, you got to remember, the person has died. Okay, the person's been buried. But that's kind of like, and the easiest way to look at it, first and foremost, is that the vehicle is dead. The person themselves is no longer there. Okay, that's the first thing you got to get through your head, is it's a vehicle that passed away. And this was, by the way, about 20 years ago, and I don't know how they did it, but they found out when you take into consideration fluid loss and gaseous release when somebody dies, there is still apparently a 2-ounce discrepancy of missing matter. That is the person you're talking to. That's the energy you're seeking. Now, that being said, when somebody has passed away, okay, there's 3 ways of doing it. Okay, I'll give you the method, the places to implement it first. 3 places to implement it. The easiest way to keep the person in mind is if you've got a photograph of them. Okay, I mean, the idea is bring a picture to the forefront of your mind. It's easier if you've got a photograph of them. Okay, so your 3 methods: take the photograph and sit down quietly in your own room and talk to them as though they're right there. Okay, that's one method. Very quiet, very solitary, and I'll get back to you momentarily here with what goes on. Second method is you take that photograph to any gravesite. Doesn't have to be any cemetery. Doesn't have to be the gravesite that the person is buried in. Okay, but you take that photograph with you, you sit down quietly, or you walk peaceably, and talk to them as though they're right there with you. Okay, now you can do this in your own head. There's no problem. They don't have vocal cords, so they're doing it telepathically anyway. Okay, that's the second method. Nobody will question you if you're sitting in your own home and talking to a photograph. Nobody is going to be there to bother you or to question what you're up to. Okay, if you go to a cemetery, it's accepted that people wander around talking to their loved ones. This is just a societal acceptance. Doesn't have to be whoever's actual gravesite, because the people that are around you that may see you, in all fairness, don't know if you know the person, and for that matter, in all fairness, don't care. But the method I like most of all, which is so much more entertaining, at least for me, is take that photograph down to a restaurant. Sit on your own at the table. Grab yourself a coffee. I wouldn't recommend paying for one for them. Okay, but you bring the photograph with you and talk to them as though they're on the other side of the table. That's the one I like. Of course, I like to be a little bit of a sheep disturber on occasion. Okay, but that's the first, and that's the where. Okay, now the how is ask them anything. Now, when you're talking to them, ask them in terms that you can that you can get a definitive yes or no. Okay, when you're starting, that is your easiest method to do it. And the reason that works is because the most common places that you'll feel the answer is you'll get across the back of your neck or across your forearms. You'll get a tingling sensation, much like your hand waking up after it's been asleep, or your foot. But this is why you talk in yes and no. If you get a yes, the stronger the tingle, the more definitive the yes. If it's a no, you won't likely feel anything. Okay. And that's where you start. You'll eventually figure out how to trust your own instincts. Now, you will question right off the bat, is this my imagination? Is it just extrapolation because of what I knew of the person before? Okay. Well, the answer is it's a combination. Okay. But much more importantly, it's a very real method. Okay. And the reason we know this is real, I remember talking to a client one day. We were actually talking finances. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this woman, I'm going, who, pray tell, is this heavy-set chap? A little bit on the rotund side, but boy, does he have a sense of humor. He is always laughing, and he's slapping his leg right in front of us and pointing at you. And he's going, gotcha. Who the heck is this guy? Well, the woman bust out laughing. Right, like she sat there for a little bit, and then she's all of a sudden laughing her head off. And she goes, "You're describing my Uncle Joe. My Uncle Joe, and I don't know if his name was Joe anymore. But she goes, that's the way he was. He was always practical joking people. And he's just, he was always, he'd do it, and then he'd slap his knee, and he'd point at the person, he'd go, gotcha." Right. And, from my stand, then the second that was identified, he was gone. I'm like, he just wanted to let you know he was safe. That's the only thing that comes up. Right. But, just to put that in perspective there, Joe, if you're sitting there talking to the dead in the gravesite or not in the gravesite, it's so much better than digging them up. Okay. And no, you do not require a piece of clothing of theirs. You do not require a piece of their body. You require just something that brings them to the forefront of your mind. And a memory will work just as well. Okay. I mean, I can still see, of course, I'm a little bit of an exception in a lot of ways, but I can still see many of the people that I've known that have now passed away. Okay, I've seen a lot of them. And because, for me, that's just plain normal. For you, it will take some time, in all likelihood, to actually focus and to actually get used to the sensation that you're making headway. But what you do is ask questions when you're looking to prove to yourself that it's real. Ask them questions that you don't personally have the answer to, but somebody else does. Okay. Get them to answer and then go back and talk to the person that has the answer. Okay. You can just chalk it up to when you go to talk to them, to the living person. You can easily chalk it up to as, I was just thinking about John, and did he ever do this, or did he ever own this thing? I seem to remember somewhere along the line him talking about it. I just want to know, if my memory is serving me right. Eventually, you'll get to the point, and I can't give you a physical time frame this will happen on. But eventually, you'll get to the point that you trust your instincts to know that what you're doing is connecting. It'll start with one person, and eventually, you'll get the fun thing of having me with like 4 guys looking in my window right now. Okay. It's just kind of an odd setup, but you can get used to it. But hopefully that'll give you some tools to work with. Okay. Absolutely. Like I said, Joe, I've said this on pretty much any event I've been on, any broadcast I've been on. regardless of the question, yes, we were talking about the Draconian Empire, and obviously mediumship is not part of the thing you have to worry about. Although they do have their mediums, they do believe that their belief in the creator, they call the Great Drake. Okay, the Great Drake is their creator. Their equivalent to Satan would be Nataj. Okay, that's but they are a firm believer that the Great Drake created Nataj. It's that simple. Okay, it's not, they don't separate it. They go, Great Drake created everything. Nataj was the representation, the one that handled what many people call evil. But in all fairness, she was also handed jurisdiction over contract law. She's the one that punished people for not following the contract. And yes, even when it came to things like celebrations, they do give gifts and what have you. But again, contract law. If you tell your kid you're getting them such and such, you get them such and such, or Nataj will punish you. Okay. And so, of course, they got to be very focused, and the Draconian Empire became very focused on doing things in the right fashion, of making certain they followed their word. And this is the nice part about it. See, to them, Nataj, who you would refer to, who most Christians refer to as Satan, they do not break contracts. The contract is there. That is what their life is. The Tormenon took that to a whole new level, and everything revolves around it. But the Draconian Empire is not a conquering empire. It doesn't come in and take over a world. They go, okay, the world's occupied. Let's get a foothold here, as in, let's negotiate land rights to an area, and then we will work from there. Okay, they are ultimately their whole idea of expanding their world. Find an uninhabited world, certainly lay claim to it. If it's inhabited, then you set up the camp until you can arrange some sort of a definitive agreement with them. Okay, at which point you lock it down and go, this is our community. But they do not go in and conquer. Okay, Kamalians, yeah, they will have been known to go in and conquer because they developed the idea that we're going in, we want, we take. The might is right mentality. Okay, however, Earth is protected. Okay, they will not attack Earth. It's completely protected when you got that kind of defensive power. And I don't mean mankind has defensive power. I mean that the consortium does. Okay, the Kamalians will not invade this planet. Okay. And that's just the reality behind it, because the Draconians, they managed to instill that in the different races all the way down. And when they did finally cut communication, when communication finally collapsed, they still had those backbones. Okay, respect of each other, regardless of who you were. Waste not, want not. Contract law is dominant. Okay. And absolutely take care of the area you're living in. Do not destroy the place that you're trying to live. Okay, they also came to the understanding that expanding too fast was not going to work. Now, in all fairness, Joe, I really have to say thank you personally for being with me today. Absolutely wonderful to have you. I'm amazed at how, I don't know if it's amazed, disappointed, appalled, I don't know. But I'm really pleased you're here. The fact you were the only one here certainly made it easy from my standpoint to continue. Okay, but we are hitting the 2-hour mark, and I'm sure you've got things to do. I know I've got things to do. One of the biggest things I've got to do right now is start working on laying out laying out where I'm going from here. Okay, I'm not stopping this. It's a little disappointing, certainly, that there was only one person in the room today. Glad you were here, though. But with that in mind, I'm going to bring this to a close here. And absolutely, if you've got questions we didn't get to, good morning, Wendy. How are you? Glad you made it. We're just literally winding things down. But I am glad you made it. That being said, if you've got questions, absolutely drop me a line. There's a whole list of ways of getting a hold of me. I will do my best to get back to you on them. Okay. And I've got a bunch of things I've got to get to. Okay. Not the least of which is, as you can tell, my throat's starting to seize up. That said, thank you so much for joining me. Really do appreciate it. And until we meet again, okay, do take care of yourselves and each other. And for pity's sakes, stay positive.